Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. The opinions and attitudes expressed by guests on the Fountainhead Forum do not necessarily reflect the opinions and attitudes of the Fountainhead Forum or the opinions and attitudes of Chris Baker. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 58. I have Sunny Lohmann, who is a longtime objectivist and a comedian living in California right now. She's still there in California. So. How are you,
Loving
Sunny?
it. Yeah. Loving California. I'm good.
Yeah. Where are you in California?
I'm in Laguna Beach. So basically, I'm away from all the craziness. I'm in this beautiful paradise. And they can do whatever they want in San Francisco. They can do whatever they want in LA. People here just don't care, and they do their own thing. COVID was almost a non-issue living here. It was really unusual. So
that's good to know. There does seem to be that we're not LA feeling in Orange County, which I believe is, of course, Kristen Cavallari. I always think of that when I think of Laguna Beach, but yes. So how did you how did you get into Ayn Rand?
Originally, I was 17. My dad gave me a copy of Atlas Shrugged. Yep. And I had been for years, I don't know, probably a lot of objectivists went through something similar where you're kind of intellectual. When you turn 14, you start going, well, what are the answers and how should I live my life? And where's the code, And I was exploring religion, and I was raised basically nothing. So exploring different philosophies, and thank God. None of it resonated. All of it was just kind of like, well, where's the certainty? Where's the reality-based moral code? I thought that must exist, and it didn't. And finally, I read Atlas Shrugged, and it just blew my mind. So, and then of course, everything after that. And then I was fortunate. I went to the University of Minnesota. We had a fantastic student organization there. There were just a handful of universities that had really thriving, terrific clubs, and I got really lucky. The people in that club are still my close friends to this day. And it was a great place to study and eventually, realize, okay, this is it. I'm an objectivist,
Were you originally from Minnesota or?
Yeah, I'm from Minnesota.
And now you're in California. So yeah, I wish I'd heard more stories like that, where you got involved with this club at college and you're still friends with them.
I know.
And very sadly, I don't hear.
There just weren't a lot of clubs,
because it's, or just getting involved with any club and still, because it seems like to me, people, because you also hear people, getting involved with the club and then leaving in disgust after 2 or 3 years.
Part of it. I think my group did a particularly good job of just refusing to include riffraff. I know, and I use that term. I think there are lurkers, people who kind of show up. They're sort of really weird. They just want to argue. They're not, there to improve themselves, really. I don't know what it is, but they were kicked out. I saw that happen a couple of times where just rabble-rouser types, and they would just get kicked out because people were like, hey, we're serious. We're here to study. These are the texts, we're reading Opar right now. That's what we're reading. We're not, we're not going to do anything else right now. And so I don't know. And then, but I saw that exact kind of template at a couple of other colleges doing really well and thriving. And I assume the people in those clubs are still connected. If people watch my podcast, which I've just canceled, But my co-host for the last I've been doing it for 6 years. My co-host is my friend from college, from the Objectivist Club.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're still, all these years later, we're still really close. So
yeah. There's a bit, and I don't know if it made a difference, because you were involved, maybe because you're in a more socialist place like Minnesota, if that brought you together. Anybody I know who was involved with that club, or?
I don't know. I mean, Jason Swihart went on to work at the Ayn Rand Institute for a few years.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, Doug, my buddy, me. I mean, that's 3 right there that kind of are in the public.
Doug who?
Doug Reich, my friend, who's my co-host. He's also a blogger at The Rational Capitalist. Okay. He's been writing a lot of critiques of the Ayn Rand Institute, or not so much of them, but he was writing a blog where he would dissect some of these what we thought were insane policies coming out of that organization. He did a lot of work, a lot of intellectual work, picking that apart and showing it for what it was. So, he's a writer there. I'm trying to think if there's my other close friend, he's just working in Minneapolis, just living his life. I mean, he's not everybody becomes like an activist.
Yeah, it's certainly not everybody does, but they might go on and do other things too. It's, you don't have to. I mean, people say, they start a business, or some of them go into tech work,
Yeah.
And if you're Jimmy Wales, you go trade futures and options in Chicago, and then you go get with Larry Sanger and start Wikipedia. So, they're doing a lot of different things, or Dr. Nathaniel Brandon going and starting his psychology practice. I mean, there's a bunch of people doing different things here. When you say riffraff, what's your definition of riffraff? I mean,
just troublemakers. That's what I think. Like, they're just people who show up to make trouble. They don't show up to honestly study ideas or debate them or discuss them. They're just troublemakers. And I think, a lot of times people don't have the guts to just call that out and say, get out. We're not, you don't fit in with us. And so it just doesn't work. You're going to wreck our club. Get out. I mean, I know that sounds harsh, but I don't say that was done frequently. It was done when it was warranted. People coming in and all they want to do is argue and make trouble. And that isn't to say, I mean, we argued all the time about ideas, but when somebody just comes in and they're obviously just there to oppose you and just make trouble, it's different. It's a different vibe. And those people were not invited back.
Yeah, I wonder too if there's and sometimes I wonder if there's something about objectivism that attracts a certain class of people. But
I think any set of ideas attracts those types. People just lurk around. They're looking for places to go and intellectually destroy people. Like they think they get some satisfaction out of that, and so of course. But any idea system would attract people like that, I think.
Yeah. So when were you at Minnesota? Was this back in the
early 90s?
Okay, so this was early 90s. And early 90s, you might have had email then at the time, I suppose.
Yes.
But so you were an early person to get on email, but because there was email in the 80s and on the 90s and on universities, and certainly a big one like Minnesota would have had it. But
I got a student email.
Yeah, so then you gravitated toward that, and you maybe got involved with ARI or.
Absolutely, they were pivotal in our group. They sent us free boxes and boxes of pamphlets with, Ayn Rand's ideas, some of her essays that we could give away at our talks and things. They provided us with a speaker list. They provided us with grant money that we used to fly those speakers in and rent spaces. And we also got grants from our university. But, they were hugely important to us. They would give us lecture tapes that cost, those tapes of like Peikoff's Art of Thinking, which was this huge tape set, which cost hundreds of dollars. And we were students, we couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
They would loan that to us and we would then listen to it as a group and then send them back. So they were great. I mean, they really were. And that was back under the Mike Berliner days.
Yeah, Mike Berliner. Yeah, he was running things. Yeah, yeah. You know, what was the overall environment at Minnesota like at the time?
You mean in the state?
Well, at the university. I mean, was it because I'm not. You know, what's been brewing with the colleges has been brewing for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there was stuff, right? We all saw that stuff in college, in a more minor way. But we used to, you know, we would put up posters, and there would be a rival group that would tear them down. The little communist group. My introduction to world history class in my freshman year there was called Red, White, and Black.
Wow.
And like what we learned was sort of just like a little shallow overview of actual American history, and then deep dives into Indians and the slave colonies, and you know what it was like to be a slave, what it was like to be an Indian, what it was like. The only description of white people was the factory abuse, you know, of like children. And it was just, like, that was in early 90s. It was like that. Yeah. So, and that was the 101. So that was like 400 kids in an auditorium. That wasn't, you know, so that was terrible. And, and I got a business degree. So in business class, 101 management, I remember getting an essay assigned to me, or I had to write a paper on why Nintendo shouldn't be allowed to control their prices. That was literally the question. And I wrote an answer saying, well, I don't agree with this premise. You know, of course they should be allowed to control their prices. We live in a free market. And I got an F for not answering the question. So that was business school, and it was already, you know, captured by communists. At the 101 level. Anyway, I doubt that I think the higher level classes were less like that, but at the general level, it was 100% communist already. So
yeah. Did you have any friends on the faculty? At least
no.
Usually a club has to have a faculty advisor or something like that, but that doesn't always happen.
I found the philosophy department to be way fair. I mean, I remember writing papers where I would quote Ayn Rand and I would get A's. You know, they were still, I mean, I know that sounds strange, but all the communists were in the business school and in the history and like some of the sciences that you would expect. You would expect them to be in philosophy, but there they were tolerant of viewpoints. Whereas in the offshoot, you know, the more what you would expect to be more scientific, we're not.
No interaction.
So that was the environment. But, you know, Minnesota is very socialist and has been for a long time, but more of that kind of Scandinavian style socialism. So a little more tolerant, a little more, you know, willing to not always vote for the socialist. If you remember, that's the state that voted for Jesse Ventura for governor. You know, they don't like corruption. They like responsibility. So it's just a little bit, it's a bit of a different style of socialism. It's not quite the anarcho-Stalin-esque kind of thing that we're seeing now.
You know, the Scandinavian style of socialism is more a case of we'll tax you to death, but we'll kind of let you do whatever you want, and we'll have all these programs. Whereas there's more of this heavy-handed regulatory style of socialism where we'll tax you, but then we'll also tell you how to do everything. And I don't think the Scandinavian style of socialism is nearly.
It's not as totalitarian. I think that's a good point. It's not all up in your business.
Yeah. you can still open a business, maybe fill out one form, whereas in some of the worst places you have to fill out 20 forms and you just throw up your hands and give up. I also don't know if maybe that has something to do with the fact that Scandinavian countries are smaller countries, and you might have a lower proportion of representatives to people. If your representative is, say represents 10,000 people,
I
as
think
opposed
it's
to
cultural. I think there's a work ethic and
yeah,
a self-responsibility.
yeah,
People are disgusted by people who don't take responsibility for themselves. So while they will give you some food, they're disgusted by you.
and
There's
maybe there's
so it's like, okay, you can have this food because you're obviously in need and we are compassionate and we want a community that is not full of sick and uh, poor and starving people. We don't approve of that, but you know this should be temporary. You should help yourself. At some point, you need to pull yourself up, and we'll help you and we'll give you a hand. But they really do believe in self responsibility and working. It's that old Puritan or is it Puritan or Protestant kind of work ethic thing.
yeah.
It's
I
very
wonder.
strong in that culture. So,
I wonder also if maybe it's just part of this culture of having, because you live in this place where you're having to fight. You really have to fight the weather, and you deal with this cold weather. And I don't know if that
yeah,
makes them
I'm sure
stronger.
that shaped the the grit of these people. Yeah, I mean, even back in the old countries,
Yeah,
Norway, Sweden, very cold, harsh environments. So
yeah.
possibly, yeah. But now it's 2023 and look what's happening to Minneapolis. Look what's happening to the
Oh
city.
yeah,
It's a total disaster. It's almost ground zero in woke, BLM bullshit. And sorry, can I swear on your podcast?
yeah, yeah. Sure, go ahead.
Um
Yeah,
the the it's a disaster. The city is not at all. When I go there to visit
yeah.
family, I mean it's incredible how destroyed it is. It's really sad because it was a great
It
place to
is
grow
sad.
up.
Yeah, it's a great place to grow up. Yeah, so yeah,
Not anymore. I
yeah,
wouldn't I wouldn't take my daughter back there for anything. It's sad. I mean, I the city is where I grew up in the city, and
yeah.
that is where it's really changed.
The cities really have changed. When did you leave Minnesota?
I left twice. I left right after college. I left for about a decade and then I went back and then I left again most recently and moved to California in 2014. So
Yeah,
about 10 years ago.
yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah, yeah. Although I've heard people go out on the lakes, and sometimes it can be an interesting place. But yeah, I don't know if I'd ever
It's
want to live in
beautiful.
Minnesota. Yeah.
It's freezing cold
Oh yeah.
in the winter. It's too harsh. I didn't want to live with that anymore. That's the main
Mhm.
reason I left. People say to me, "Well, how could you move to California? It's like, you know, politically it's so bad." I'm like, "Well, I'm from Minnesota."
Yeah. Did you
Kind
ever
of
think
used
about
to all these tyrants and the high taxes and all that stuff.
Did you? Yeah, obviously, since you're used to cold weather, did you ever think about the free state of New Hampshire?
I didn't want to live in cold weather anymore.
Okay.
So no. I love California. Being from Minnesota, I wanted to live near water. I guess New Hampshire is near water.
Yeah, you
But
can
it's
live near.
harsh.
Yeah.
It's harsh up there. It's nice here. It's
Well,
nice
yeah.
here all the time.
I thought of what they're doing there, so we want to get on to the topic. So, what do you think has happened to the I happened to ask Richard Salzman about this last night. And I just said to him, I said, did you break with the Ayn Rand Institute because of their sellout on COVID? And the first thing he brought up was the fact that they took some bailout money, and I have to admit I can't necessarily blame them for taking the bailout money, but then I said to him, "No, Richard, what I'm talking about is their promotion of Amesh Adalja," and he said, "Oh, and he was very disappointed with that. What happened? What has happened?
What is Richard's take on what happened? Or when did he have his
He
break?
wasn't happy about it, and I think that was at least part. He said there were other reasons why but that was at least a contributing factor to why because he broke with ARI about that time.
Well, I think you have to say, what sort of people would promote Amesh Adalja and take PPE and moralize and declare evil anyone who disagrees with their political stances that aren't related to objectivism?
Yeah.
What sort of people? And if those are the kind of people, do you want, you're doing business with those kind of people, what other kinds of things are happening? So, I mean, maybe Richard's being kind, but he has also had some rants online where he has personally attacked several of the higher ranking people involved.
Yeah.
So I think there are some bad people who have taken over the leadership of the Ayn Rand Institute, and they are bad. And that's it. And as a result, you see all this other stuff. That's my take. I mean, I can talk more about that, but that's my basic take. I think that I think under Mike Berliner, ARI was maybe I had complaints like, why aren't you guys doing more student clubs? Why aren't we promoting student clubs more? This is such a huge, like it helped me so much. And if you're really trying to spread Ayn Rand in the culture, you got to get into the universities. And the best way to do that is look at Young Americans for Liberty and how they've just spread, and they're on every college campus. Why couldn't ARI have done that? I mean, I think they could have. But I'm not running the place. So at the end of the day, I think the people, Mike Berliner and the people who were around at that time were earnest, and they did have the mission of spreading Ayn Rand's ideas.
Yeah, I think one, I've been involved with, a lot. I've been involved. I have my feet in a lot of different movements, and I've been involved with a lot of different people. And the division that has spread between libertarians and objectivists, in my opinion, is very tragic.
It's dumb. It's like we're just not human beings. I mean, come on. Like, we're all just human beings trying to find the best way to live together. And just because this business about like you have to be an objectivist to be perfect and to be someone that anyone should give the time of day to is so freaking weird. I mean, like, Ayn Rand wasn't an objectivist before objectivism. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, who are we? It is some of the things Ayn Rand, and this is partly why too they keep her writings and her early ideas away from the public. If you know that Ayn Rand is like Nietzschean and having all these, when she was younger, are we allowed to talk to her? It's just it is so antithetical to like honest thinking and discussing. And even today, there's a real anti-Christian bent within objectivism, as if a person believes in God, they are not to be talked to or taken seriously. Yeah. And a person who believes in God can actually have some serious freaking good ideas. So, and they can also be influenced by Ayn Rand. So if these are the people running things, and they are, I mean, this, and if people say, oh, if everybody was an objectivist, it would be some utopia. Well, that's utopian thinking. Yeah. That is not right. It is not true. I mean, just look at objectivists and the creepy people and the schisms and the craziness and the weird radical ideas that come out of some of these think tanks, some of these objectivist orgs. No, it would not be a utopia. So it's important to just be a human being and look at people as individuals. Does Jordan Peterson have some good ideas? Yes, he does. Does he have some good understanding of how to save our culture from it sinking into this anarcho-communist, crazy, nihilistic place that it is going? Absolutely. I mean, the way he talks about how to bring young men, how to lift them out of the despair that they're in. these are critical. These are great ideas, and he's totally dismissed because he's found Jesus. I mean, I really don't care. Is he going to be influential in that way too? Yes, but is that better than the progressive nihilism? You have to like be smart about this. It's so arrogant to not the earned arrogance either. It's the bad kind where you're really just you think you are better than everybody, and it's just weird. No other group is like that. No other group.
Yeah. What bothers me is that it
Except the
seems like you
woke, by
have.
the way. The other group that's like that are the woke. They're the ones who won't talk to people, who won't platform the wrong people. Like, it is so similar to that psychology.
One of the things that bothers me, and it seems like we have this case where it's now gotten to a point where you end up with where there's people who promote reason but don't promote liberty, and now you have people who promote liberty but don't really promote reason. And I think those things have to be together. ARI is not perfect, but I have. But for example, if I made an appointment with somebody who worked at ARI for 3:00, I'm pretty confident that that person from ARI would show up for the meeting at 3:00. I mean, let's say some other factions of the liberty movement, I would have almost no confidence that they would show up at 3:00. And that to me, and I remember, going to one conference and it's mostly anarchists, but it's probably, to say it's anarcho-polka. It was easily the most disorganized conference I've ever been to.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they see disorganization as some kind of virtue.
I mean, it depends. If you go to Freedom Fest, it's very organized,
Yeah. But nothing. I mean,
which, by the way, your own Brooke goes to Freedom Fest.
Freedom Fest.
Your Objectivists go to that conference.
Yeah.
So this thing about you can't talk to libertarians, it's also been, they can talk to libertarians. You can't talk to libertarians. And the other thing about it is that I believe ARI, these accusations, the problem with libertarians, according to Objectivism, is they don't have a moral code at the base of their politics, that they're capitalism only, and they don't think ethically. And as a result, they believe then they will help to usher in poor politics and ethics. Well, look at what the Ayn Rand Institute is doing. They're the same. So they think, they focus on like rights and politics at the expense of life, the standard of life, the standard of value being life. They just throw that out the window for whatever, and they're rationalist thinkers. So they make the same error, and then they say we can't talk to libertarians. So it's all ridiculous.
Yeah, sometimes it just seems like they're trying to rationalize for personal schoolyard spats, and I know part of that is just what it is.
100%. And it's also grifting. It's like protecting their little money-making schemes where they charge, $60 for a book they wrote that no one but objectivists buy. Or, they when you look at the way that they do business, with the exception of the free books program into schools, they do not appear to be wanting to spread Ayn Rand's ideas. They appear to be wanting to pay their own salaries.
Yeah. But when I get lines like this, and I said, like, as to anarchists, we were the kids in school who got in trouble for not following arbitrary rules, for marching to the beat of our own drums. You can't expect arbitrary organization from such people. Sometimes the best experiences, the most interesting conversations, the chance encounters occur while man's plans are failing. It's like, yeah, but if you say you're going to show up at 3:00, show up at 3:00. It's like, that's... Yeah, Freedom Fest is well organized. The Scouts and having worked on conferences, I know there's a lot of work involved, and there's always all kinds of things that just fall out of the sky that you can't predict. It's like
I think ARI ran an organized conference. I mean,
Yeah,
Ocon has always been, but Anu was there doing that, and she's
yeah,
wonderful, and they're good people at the organization. It's not like there aren't,
yeah.
there are some good
Oh
people,
yeah,
but she has retired now at this point, and
yeah, yeah. There's a yeah. One thing that bothers me too is I did you know it's funny in 2020 both the Libertarian Party National Convention and Ocon were supposed to be in Austin. I was planning to go to both of them, and then of course the world went nuts. But they virtualized Ocon, and I'll tell you what, I'm this was 3 years ago, and I was just turned 49. But I'm thinking, boy, this crowd is old. And
I haven't seen it. I
yeah,
haven't been. I don't
when,
go there anymore.
when
I would rather go to the Objective Standard
yeah,
conference. And
I may go to TOSCon, and I partial reason why I signed up for it was just because it was in Austin. I wouldn't have to, it's no big deal. It's
yeah,
no big deal for me to go to it. Same thing with LP National. I don't need to get a hotel or anything. I can just show up.
yeah.
I pay for it and save on those expenses. But yeah, it was just, I mean, and it wasn't until then and that I realized, oh crap, they're promoting all this nonsense. Although I wasn't really happy with the direction some of these organizations took after the World Trade Center either. It seems like they're okay with just about any war that America launches, and that's not defense. We're a very rich country. We're a powerful country, and these little countries that have 1/10 the population or even less than that are no threat to us whatsoever.
Yeah, they're hawks, and
Yeah,
they also will not discuss it. If you
yeah,
say, I don't think that war is justified, they'll say, what are you, an isolationist? I mean, they have the method of the bad thinker where they just shut down conversation with labels and, oh, you're a libertarian, I won't talk to you. Oh, you don't like that war, you're an isolationist. Like
yeah,
it is, they don't think.
yeah. I still occasionally go out to the local meeting here, although and there are some good people there. You
What's
wonder
the
how
local meeting for you?
there's well, I'm in Austin. There's a Central Texas
There
Objectivist.
is a huge amount of objectivists in Austin.
Yeah,
There's like hundreds or
yeah,
something.
I remember one time we went to this meeting where we just talked about books, and eventually somebody said to me, you have a lot of interesting or a lot of unusual takes on things, and I just stopped going, and
If you haven't learned by now
yeah, oh yeah,
that
that's why I just
if
walk away from it
if
sometimes. Yeah,
people haven't learned by now after COVID and everything else that that things that we thought we knew are not true, and that we need to rethink a lot of things. I think
yeah,
my good friend and co-host Doug, I always thought of him as a conspiracy theorist compared to me. Like he enjoyed kind of deep diving into these JFK and things like that. And I thought, okay, that's a little nutty, but it turns out he was right about all of it. And the difference between him and me was just he had read more about those
yeah,
things. So, like, I just realized now that I was just ignorant.
yeah,
Um, and now I like where I'm at now because I feel that the wiser stance is if you haven't really studied something, you don't really know what happened.
yeah,
That even the things that you were taught in elementary school and junior high, the facts are so distorted. You got to go back into it, and if you really want to have an opinion about it, and shutting people down with you know, who have a different idea than you about some historical thing or the way things are run now, or, even what happened, what can be done about it. Cause what can we see in history works and doesn't work? All of that is kind of up in the air
I
for me.
I think it's silly to reject conspiracy theories, and I would just say something, and usually my best response to them, I would say, so do you think Vince McMahon's wrestling is real? Or are you going to tell me, for example, that an athlete has never thrown a sporting event? Or I mean, these things do happen. But I also think people can get way too caught up in conspiracy theories
Yeah,
to
of
the point
course. I
that
mean,
they,
it's
to the point that they completely reject ideology. And I mean, you know, I mean, and I think this is partially why conservatives have lost so much. I mean, Obama, goes out and proposes this horrible healthcare plan, and their strategy is to talk about his birth certificate. I mean, that's totally stupid.
mm-hmm.
I mean,
Agreed.
talk about why this is a bad policy, and of course they lost. And,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it was just, and, it's funny how that just went away once it was all,
Well, but what
you know,
we're really learning now is they didn't want to win.
yeah.
So that is what's really tragic, is that this whole time we have felt like we've had at least some opposition and that people somewhat met what they were saying, or some of them did, but they didn't. They wanted Obamacare. They had their own deals. They're part of the uniparty. The big
Yeah.
conspiracy is that
Yeah.
this government of ours has not been a two-party government for a long time.
Oh yeah, and if you've been involved with a libertarian, you'll know how they just, I mean, it's not even how they openly conspire to keep third parties off the ballot and make it difficult for third parties to run,
So
whether
are
it be
you involved in the
I,
libertarians?
I've been
What do
involved
you,
with the
what do
Libertarian
you
Party
think
a lot.
about the Mises Caucus takeover?
Uh, the takeover of the Mises Caucus was largely a reaction to, for me at
COVID,
least,
right?
the fact that the LP was extremely timid on COVID. I
Oh
mean,
my God, it's disgraceful. Jeff
a lot
Tucker
of these,
just wrote an article in Brownstone kind of calling out the his own
well,
tribe, the libertarians, for being so
but
weak on it.
yeah, and he was more calling out the intellectual organizations who were
Cato
absolutely
and Reason, and
Cato,
yeah,
Cato,
yeah,
and also, Penn Jillette, as in Penn
yeah.
and Teller, yeah, but uh, the messaging, and there were places where they were saying things like, we need to get rid of regulations on tests, we need to get rid of, we need to make it, we need to get rid of, we need to shorten this approval process for drugs. They were talking about the same things that they'd always talked about, but they hardly talked about, the restrictions on civil liberties. And Angela McArdle, who was the chair of the party in Los Angeles County, uh, she was organizing rallies and really getting people. I think she also got on that initiative that basically voted down vaccine mandates, I think either in the city or the county. And that's how she got elected chair, I think, is because she
Right.
raised her
She
profile.
she had a
Uh,
strong stance on
uh,
COVID.
there were a lot of people who were very weak. I don't know. I don't know what happened with the LP. Sometimes I think it might have been the influence of big donors. It's something I'm curious
Absolutely. I
about.
mean, it was the whole
Yeah,
Bill Weld, Gary Johnson kind of neoconservative crew.
yeah,
It was a weird crew to have in charge of libertarians,
yeah,
in my opinion. I mean, they weren't really libertarians. I mean, not in the way I understand it. And the people involved in the Mises Caucus is like Ron Paul and
yeah.
Tom Woods. And these are not like fringe weirdos.
This is, there,
Dave Smith.
we've talked about Trump derangement syndrome. I'm fearing now that there's a certain degree of what I would call Ron Paul derangement syndrome. And I don't, and I can understand where that comes from, because I do. There is a fear that there's going to be there is somewhat of a fear that the party might get taken over by three theocrats, and there's also a very legitimate fear that some of these people are what they call bordertarians. They're libertarians, but they also are a little bit paranoid about immigrants, and to me, COVID hysteria is not all that much different from
No,
immigration
I
hysteria.
think that is such a smear.
Yeah,
I got to stop you there because people who are for regular immigration and not hordes coming across the border in unknown quantity from unknown countries with unknown freaking problems. That is, we have a right as citizens of the United States to say, no, you got to come through the front door. Okay. At least. And if you want to reform immigration policy, that's what you have to do. Opening the border to, millions of very, very poor, possibly diseased, possibly criminal, probably criminal, maybe even enemies of the state, literally enemies of the state from other, from like China or something. That's insanity. That is death. And again, this is like this idea that somehow your political philosophy shouldn't include the fact that life is actually your standard. We have a right. We're citizens of a country. And like it or not, there are nations involved here. This is not a one world government. This is the United States of America. It has a freaking border. So when people say, oh, people who are against this just totally fluid border are against immigration, that's a smear. That is not true. I don't think I've never heard anybody say, except I heard Ann Coulter say, shut it down. No more immigration for 10 years. Like, other than her, I've never heard anybody say that. So I don't think that the libertarians who are not for open borders are for no immigration. That's crazy.
Well, there are certainly different degrees on this. We could talk about, an issue like suitcase nukes, which would certainly be something you'd want to keep out. Somebody and suitcase nukes.
What about a bioweapon? What if, do we really talk about conspiracy theories? I don't know a lot about it. I haven't looked into it, but there was the historical event where the British government flooded China with opium on purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible China is flooding us with deadly fentanyl on purpose through our southern border, through the Mexican cartels. The Mexican cartels are criminal organizations. They're mafias, and they are running our border. They're foreign criminal organizations running our border. That's not acceptable. I mean, I just don't understand anybody who, I feel like that is such a crazy, crazy thing to advocate for on the grounds of like rights. I mean, what? Whose rights?
So that you're wanting to keep out something so people want these things.
Let it come through the front door.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let it come.
But
okay.
If it's a bioweapon,
let it come through the front door. Yeah.
If it's a bioweapon, which there is evidence to suggest that it is, because kids are buying pot and it's being laced with this highly, highly deadly fentanyl. This is not what they want to buy. I believe legalization is partly a cure to this, because then people know what they're getting.
Well, legalization has driven it underground, and as kids will say, it's easier.
Absolutely,
it's easier for a kid to buy pot than it is for a kid to buy beer.
Right. Okay, but so let's say you have a situation, and then you have the CCP going, what can we do? It's very cheap and easy to make fentanyl in this deadly, deadly potent amount, where if a gram, a little tiny grain gets on your stuff, you could die. That's insane. That's a bioweapon. That's not a drug. That's not a recreational drug.
That's not something I was not aware. I have to admit, this is something I'm not fully aware of. Yeah. The whole fentanyl thing. That's definitely,
There's something sinister going on. Again, I'm only a little. I've not looked into it deeply, but there seems to be evidence that there's something going on, and it's coming from China. And there are people who know more than me, and I don't just take it on faith, but people who are more involved in this, who absolutely say this is China. This is a deliberate attempt to kill and addict many Americans. And what's going on in our cities is partly responsible for all of this. So, are we just going to go, oh, well, our cities are degrading. There are people with serious addiction now all over the place. This is a mental health crisis in front of our faces that's wrecking our society. It's wrecking our society. And we're just going to go, fine, it's fine. There's got to be a way to solve this.
But we also have to take a look at ourselves and accept responsibility for that.
Fine. I mean, there's multi causes. How does a population get so available to this problem? But I mean, people have been doing drugs for thousands of years. So now people are dying by the boatload because of this particular drug, and it's coming from China. So who calls us their enemy?
But
they have a very long-term plan that they've written about and set out. It's obvious they say it, and we just go, "Oh, they don't mean it."
Yeah,
it's so dumb.
I definitely,
they own our president right now.
Yeah,
based on what came out just a couple weeks ago, the whole entire Biden family taking in all this money, and Joe Biden is a China tool.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of tools out there. I don't know, we've allowed all our manufacturing to go out. Although I think there are a lot of factors involved with that. I think largely because I think the loss of a lot of our manufacturing was due mainly to the fact that we started to inflate the dollar. It seems interesting how all that happened immediately.
It's so many reasons, right? Like there's all this bad policy, but also free people can't compete easily with slave labor in the tens of millions, and what would Ayn Rand say about trading with a slave country? She would not be for that. So I don't care what your free market, whatever, in certain cases, it's your life or this principle. And you have to learn how to apply principles in context.
And I generally, as far as taxes go, I certainly regard tariffs as one of the lesser of the evils. I mean, I'd rather have high tariffs and no income tax, certainly, and
absolutely
high tariffs and no sales.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree.
The
the danger is like that you'll have all of them, right? Like we do. We don't have the VAT tax yet, but people want to implement the VAT tax and they go, "Oh, it's fairer," and it's true. But first, you have to get rid of the income tax, right?
Yeah, and one thing I would acknowledge too is we also have a lot of libertarians who are just giving up on America. So I say, well, I want to be able to leave, and I've
go where.
That's a tough question, especially after 2020.
You know what? I have something to say about that, because I see this too. I mean, it's not just libertarians. It's anybody, any patriot, really, anybody who loves freedom and likes America and likes the way America was set up. Move into the country, get your 10 acres, get some goats, disconnect, leave the whole situation, move to another city, keep moving, eventually maybe move to an island that's largely ignored because it's useless in the geopolitics, like move to a Caribbean island or something. I don't know that there is. I think one thing that we don't understand, our generation, is civic responsibility, or just that life requires fighting for your freedom and doing something to maintain it or fight for it. Has there ever been a people in history where it just freaking works? Oh, we just put this piece of paper into effect called the Constitution, and now we're just going to ride it out and it's going to work. That is utopian thinking, and it's hard work going down to your city council every week and finding out what's going on, and it sucks, but it's part of civic responsibility. It's part of how if you value your freedom, Ayn Rand says, you act to gain and or keep it. What have all of these people done actively to gain or keep their freedom? Nothing. True, except complain on Facebook, and then they want to move. When it falls apart, they're just going to move to another place. It's going to fall apart there. If you move to the country with your 10 acres, once the government has solidified power in the cities, it will come and get your food. Look at the history. Look at the Holodomor. Every every totalitarian government takes over, solidifies, then goes out to the country and rapes the food, and you starve. So the only option is to stand your ground and fight, or you or your children are going to die. That's how bad it is. You know, these are communists. We are going the way of the Soviet Union with high tech.
Well, that's
scares the shit out of me. I just wish more people would stop leaving. Stop leaving. It's not going. It'll give you an extra decade to live, or you can fight. Join me, join others, fight.
Well, you've stayed in California, where certainly plenty of people have left. You know,
a lot of people, and I just wonder, what if they hadn't left? What if they stayed and said, no, we're not going to put up with this? And now they've just left, and like San Francisco's a ghost town. And it's
yeah.
What if they had all stayed and said, let's just show up downtown to the city council and see what we can do? A group of 12 people showing up to a San Francisco city council could make a huge difference. It would literally only take 12 to 20 people. And instead, millions have moved.
I think it's something that was probably brewing for a long time. One thing that worries me, and if I think about leaving America, sometimes I think it's the fact that America is not very pro-male at all anymore. It's very misandrist, and also
it's crazy.
For example, I can go down to Peru and I will see 6-year-old kids piloting canoes on the river, and they're not wearing life jackets. Now, if you let that happen in America, you'd probably be Child Protective Services would probably be calling you and said, "Why are you letting your kid operate that canoe on the river?"
We are such a sick society.
Yeah.
But again, what do? I have an 8-year-old. I have to work to create opportunities for her to flex her independence and her, and I try to bring her little friends in, like, okay, kids, I'm going to drop you at this store. And when you're done, get on the trolley. It's free. You know how to use it. The trolley goes and I'll meet you on the other end. And let's promote this kind of like, you can do it. Like you can navigate these things. I was riding the city bus at 10. I mean, it wasn't like this 30 years ago, but you're right. I think that's an absence of dad, father, the cultural appreciation for masculine energy, the over coddling of the anxious mom. Like she's the most anxious mother is the one that's winning, not the more chill mothers.
I think I suspect a lot of these calls, where somebody's like, my mother left me in the car with the motor running for about 5 minutes once. I suspect a lot of these calls to the police over stuff like that are probably being made by people who don't have kids. So they don't know what it's like.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I don't know, but
there's always that hyper anxious mom too, though. There are those women. And I think white women, older women, are really struggling. If you look at the who's taking SSRIs, the vast majority are 30, 40 something white women. A lot of them are moms.
Yeah, so there's a lot of single women who are just out there who are not happy at all. I think there's,
I think that the male female roles, feminism, is really hurting women too. It's not just hurting men, but women are miserable, and I think they don't know. They don't know how to have. Nobody knows how to have relationships anymore. Nobody knows how to get long-term values. with each other. It's just it's a strange time. I agree with you. And I think if you do go to other countries, you don't see that as much.
Yeah, because I know a guy who went to Mexico and married his Mexican wife. They have a little boy now, and but he says, "Well, I got good divorce laws here." And he's not worried about his wife filing for divorce at all. And what is it?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
70% of women apparently the woman just gets nothing. So it's what 70% of and 70% of divorces are the women file for divorce. Although I do think that can be a little not necessarily statistically correct, because I think some cases I know you have some cases where the men don't file for divorce, but they just walk away and disappear.
Or men have a greater tolerance for emotional, like they're not as emotional. They have a greater tolerance for a shitty relationship. If a relationship has fallen apart and you have nothing in common and you're not talking and you don't have any affection, the woman is the one who's going to leave, because that's not a relationship. The man will just kind of put up with it. I think in a lot of cases for longer, maybe.
Yeah.
But, but even in Britain, you can, like, I remember we were over there for a wedding and we went to a zoo, and you could get 3 feet away from a rhinoceros. Like, there was just this little tiny wire fence and there was the rhinoceros right there. I was like, this is the coolest thing. You could not do this in the US. All the liability and I don't know what has to happen with our legal system to stop the lawsuits. Something, though, because that's, in my opinion, what's destroying a lot of this stuff and making us so safety and careful is lawsuits caused this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest change would be loser pays. If you file a frivolous lawsuit,
I've heard tort reform, different things like that. I mean,
you lose, you have to pay their legal fees.
I think that would help our society a lot.
That's a huge factor.
Before we run out of time, do you want to talk about Amesh Adalja and the COVID?
Yeah. Let's talk about Amesh Adalja.
I can.
Yeah.
He is my favorite. He is my favorite man to hate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's easy to hate. He'll probably end up as Surgeon General, like Alan Greenspan got to be chairman of the Fed.
He's so gross.
Yeah.
I was aware of him before COVID.
Yeah.
So, because he started speaking at OCONs, and I have friends who are physicians that are objectivists, and they were talking about him behind the scenes and going, who is this guy? This guy is saying some really crappy stuff that's not in accordance with objectivism. And he's a speaker, and he's not being challenged on this stuff. And like, one of the things was that he was for California vaccine mandates. So California was the very first state to mandate the full vaccine schedule, the CDC vaccine schedule for all school kids. Mandate it. That is not medical freedom. That is antithetical to freedom. I don't care what you think of the safety and effect and efficacy of these vaccines. That's not the issue. It's not about anti-vaxxers or pro-vaxxers, or like a lot of people like to just smear this, but you have the government saying every child will be injected with these, I think there's 65 drugs, or, some of them are the same, but there's 65 shots. Your government is mandating every child gets 65 shots. Really? Like, that's, and he was for that for public health reasons, right? Like the greater good. And
how many
this was before COVID. So,
oh yeah, I know.
I knew he was an odious guy before, and his professional background is that he is smack in the middle of the establishment medicine. He worked for the CDC on, he was like on some advisory committee related to some vaccine. He works at Johns Hopkins. I mean, these are kind of like the evil empire fascist, medical fascist entities. And if you don't see that post-COVID, that the CDC is 100% a fascist organization within our government, 100% working on behalf of pharmaceutical companies and other health companies, the NIH too. So all the studies, we don't have a triple blind. One of the things Amesh Adalja loves to say is how these COVID treatments, there are no studies proving that they work. Well, that's because the people in control of the studies won't allow it. But you have all this anecdotal clinical evidence that they do work. So, people like Zelenko, who in his own clinic kept track of all of his patients who had COVID and what was happening with them. And he didn't lose a single patient because he treated them. The treatments worked. Statistically, it would be impossible for him to have the outcome that he had if Amesh Adalja is right. And yet he sticks to it because it is the establishment, the narrative put out by the fascist government that he supports, that he is a part of. And that's the guy that the Ayn Rand Institute put in charge of all of their thinking and policy around COVID, is literally the fascist guy. And I know for a fact there were objectivist physicians who notified the Ayn Rand Institute, hey, this guy is, he's got very statist ideas. This is wrong, whatever. He's wrong about these 10 things. And they were totally ignored. They didn't even get responses. So the people at the Ayn Rand Institute chose him. They like him. They didn't want to hear any dissenting opinions because they are of the same ilk. And that is the saddest thing, is the people who own Ayn Rand's copyrights, who are in control of the more credible institute. They own all of Ayn Rand's stuff. They have the rubber stamp of Leonard Peikoff. That agency, that organization is a bunch of like literally communo-fascist leftists. It has been captured, everybody, just like all of the other organizations in the United States. The Ayn Rand Institute has been captured. I'm sorry to say it, and I know it sounds kind of extreme, and these are people I know, people I've had lunch with, who used to be kind of normal, like when before Peikoff retired, I think they had to toe a certain ideological line. But since he retired, they are not good thinkers. They've fallen off the edge. They are kissing the asses of the leftist progressives because that's who they admire. They want to be part of the in crowd intellectually. And I feel like that's probably their motivation. I don't want to speak to their motivation.
I think for some objectivists too, there's still this belief that somehow government can be the hero. And some people might have saw this. This was a chance for government to be the hero.
Hey, I'm right there.
Superhero that fights the big bad virus.
I am one of those. Honestly, I didn't think prior to COVID, I did not think that the CDC was 1,000% captured. I thought the CDC still had some reasonable mission of protecting this country in the way that the military would have a legitimate use, right? Like that there is a risk of a bioweapon or a plague. There is a risk of that. I thought the CDC had a legitimate government reason to exist. I didn't realize that they are 100% wholly captured by nefarious James Taggart, Orrin Boyle types. They're part of that kind of a crew. They're the one in the little committee meeting with the Wesley Mooch, James Taggart, the union head, the Orrin Boyle, like the little group of elites that get together to decide what happens to us. That's who they are.
I
unfortunately.
I didn't know there were other objectivist doctors out there. There was another.
There are many objectivist physicians.
Yeah, of course they might be too busy practicing medicine because as opposed to just being activists going on TV.
Yeah, they're not, they're just doctors.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
a whole other career to
Yeah.
be putting yourself out there with PR and marketing and
Yeah.
writing and giving
Yeah.
speeches. That's a different kind of doctor. Um,
Yeah. And speaking of, I always tell people, when I got bit by the dog at 11 and at the age of 11 and we never found it. I said, would I go get the rabies shots again? I said, yes, I would. But, but yeah, I didn't realize when you said 65 vaccines for kids now. Oh my goodness. I don't think it was even
yeah,
close to that when I was
no,
growing
it
up.
wasn't. When we were growing up, it was probably a fourth that.
Yeah.
I mean, and they don't have any liability on
Yeah.
those drugs. They're gold mines. And so they
But
push them and they push them and they
yeah,
push them. And of course, they've captured the CDC and the
yeah.
FDA.
And,
Um, yeah,
the sad part is I think it's probably discredited some vaccines that are actually helpful.
probably.
And that's
I,
to
and you
me,
and the whole
that's the worst
COVID
part here.
fiasco, you have
Yeah.
everybody now looking at this vaccine schedule and going, okay, what else have we been fooled about? And I'm here to tell you,
Yeah.
many. I'm a mom.
You
I
know,
went through the process. I looked at every vaccine. So I'm a little bit different because I've had a chronic illness. So I was a little more skeptical of these things. To me, every drug has side effects, every single one, even an Advil. I knew this because I've had to take a lot of medications. So no drug is without consequence. So every time you take one, you have to do the cost benefit analysis. When you're looking at the vaccine schedule, you cannot think of it as all of them are the same. Each one must be looked at as a different drug because it is. And each one controls for a disease, a very specific disease with a totally different risk profile from another one, right? Like, uh, a sexually transmitted disease has a different risk profile than measles, for example. So, do you want to give your newborn baby a sexually transmitted disease vaccine, or do you want to give them a measles vaccine? Like, could they get the measles? Could they get a sexually transmitted disease? What are the risks? And so you can't just say the whole schedule is just one monolith. Oh, if you don't want that vaccine or that vaccine, you're an anti-vaxxer or you're not scientific. The way what's not scientific is to take it as a whole because they're
yeah.
all very different and the risk is very different and the benefit is very different. So anyone who talks like that, my red flags go up. The second I hear somebody say anti-vaxxer, my red flags go up because that's a slur designed to shut down thinking. You have a responsibility as a parent to know each drug you're injecting in your child's body and what it's going to do to them, what the risks are and what the benefits are, and
Yeah.
make up your mind accordingly.
And sometimes, we may not know what the risks are beforehand. I mean, I think, medicine to a certain degree is always going to be experimental. I mean, because you might have if you have some weird condition, then and sometimes shit just happens.
Yeah, every body is different.
It's unfortunate,
That's true.
and
And
having
the powers that be that you think are tracking the side effects and the adverse events, they're not.
yeah,
You think they are, but they're not. I've had side effects go totally unreported.
yeah,
Serious side effects. I've had I get a drug, I get prescribed a drug. I go look up online, I Google everything, I read multiple sources for side effects. I get, I go, okay, I'll take it. I start getting some side effects that are weird, like some things are happening, they're strange. Nowhere near on the list, nowhere. I go into a Facebook group of people taking that drug. Everybody's suffering from the same thing. Why is this not on the
yeah,
list? I don't know. But I can tell you that unless you go, like if I were going to give my kid any vaccine, I would go into a Facebook group if they still exist, if they haven't been canceled,
yeah,
and there are other forums and stuff, maybe a Telegram group. of parents whose kids have been injured by that vaccine and go in there and just see what they're saying, because they will tell you about side effects that you're not hearing about. The possibility of things and how big of a risk. Is measles such a big risk that you want to risk a 1 in 1,000 chance of seizures for a healthy child? So you have to think about that. You're talking about a healthy body. You're injecting a vaccine into them for what? Now, maybe polio. This is a long-term vaccine. It's been around. People know what it, there's all this huge, we are very comfortable with the risk profile. That might be a little different. Polio is a serious disease. Maybe. I mean, you got to process it that way.
Oh yeah, polio, and the polio vaccine came at a time too where it seemed like things were more honest.
Yes.
Same thing.
I would agree with that.
Vaccine, and Pasteur, when Pasteur, gave the rabies vaccine to that kid. I mean, he wasn't a doctor. It was actually, what he did was actually illegal. But they said, well, yeah, it was illegal, but this is a good thing, so we'll keep it. And
similar advances in medicine happened when there were no regulations. Like if you think about insulin, someone comes up with this thing and it seems to work. So they go into the hospital ward of all of these diabetic children dying, and they inject all of them with the story of the insulin thing is very moving. They go in and they inject insulin into all these children, and by the time they get to the last kid, the first one is sitting up for the first time in months, and they all lived. And it's, that was not a randomly controlled trial. That was done in kind of a different way when medicine was a little more creative. The stuff happening today is it's all about money and power. Sorry to say, it's Orrin Boyle and James Taggart deciding what medicine should be studied and what medicine should be approved and not approved, what medicine you can't have. There's that too. It's not just what they want to give you, it's what they won't allow you to have that might work, that might be cheaper, It's so corrupt. And Amesh Adalja is in the center of that. And that's who the Ayn Rand Institute put forth as their expert.
The only time I heard Amesh say anything, he did question certificate of need laws to his credit, but that's the only time I've heard him question anything with the establishment. And I think the most damning thing about the whole war on coronavirus and how the media approached it, hardly anybody talked about the biggest factor in all of this is that so many of these people who died with COVID were 150 pounds overweight. Nobody talked about that.
Yeah, or vitamin D deficient. I mean, there were a lot of really easy fixes. But they didn't want there to be. They wanted there to be intense fear. They wanted to inject as many vaccines in bodies as possible, and then charge the taxpayer for those vaccines. So they take your money. Then they want to make you have an expensive injection that you're getting for free. They used your money to pay themselves for a mandatory vaccination that doesn't work and isn't effective. That's the other thing too. Amesh would say it's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. And those two words for an experimental medication are impossible. You never say that. You go, well, we think, and it's showing this safe. You don't know safe after 9 months. And by the way, there were also rumors about how the Pfizer study that they had broken the blind, that Facebook was taking down Facebook groups of the people in the study talking about their adverse events. And that there were all kinds of shenanigans that raised my red flag before the vaccine even hit the market.
One of a more interesting development, I'm going to probably bring him on here sometime. As a guy who's been in Peru for 30 years, and he's very much into Amazonian plant medicines. And he announced a couple days ago that I'm no longer giving ayahuasca to anybody who's had the vaccine. And I'm like, wow. And
wow.
And of course, there are other things that will disqualify you from drinking ayahuasca because it can react very dangerously with a lot of things, but like SSRIs.
I don't know anything about it, but
But when he
if
comes out and says we're not serving anybody, and I talked to some other people and said, yeah, I get it too. And
yeah,
I've also
interesting. I
noticed
feel
that,
really bad for people who took the vaccine and are worried. It's really scary.
but
And
I've
we
also,
don't know the extent. I mean, it's going to be years before the
and
real extent is known. And it
and
might
I'm
not ever
hearing
be known because they're burying the evidence.
and I'm hearing more and more of those stories of people having, various chronic diseases that they
Yeah.
basically found ways to fix them by going outside of the medical establishment, and they're very much lost a lot of trust for the medical establishment in
Yeah.
this country. It's and I don't know how you can't think it's
I had a doctor tell me yesterday, this is the current medical establishment. You're in a car, the check engine light is flashing. You go to the mechanic, he snips the wire.
Yeah.
No more check engine light.
Yeah, or as I like to say, you've got a hole in your tire and you keep going to the mechanic and he keeps refilling it with air instead of fixing the tire. It's
Yeah.
it's rather ridiculous. I've also considered the possibility, and I even asked one of I had a doctor friend who completely sold out on all this, and I once asked him, I said, has somebody threatened you? I asked him, I mean, did somebody threaten to take away your medical license or something like that? And
What is that?
and if people were threatened, they're not going to say they were threatened. You don't talk,
People have said they're threatened. Of course they were threatened.
yeah,
Doctors came out. The guy who ran for governor in Minnesota, Scott Hansen, I
yeah,
think his name is.
okay,
He's
yeah,
a physician. He was making videos online just talking about COVID and treatment and his questions about the vaccine. And he received a letter from the state agency that licenses him telling him to shut up.
yeah,
That he's not allowed to say anything bad about vaccines
yeah.
or he'll lose his license.
And you probably, and I've heard, since you're in Orange County, you're 100 miles from Mexico. You certainly probably know people who go to Mexico just to get health care, right?
I do.
I mean, I've heard a
There
lot
are
of people
clinics
dental
in
work and stuff
Tijuana.
like that. They
Yeah.
just go right across the border, because it's actually, it's funny. And what the socialists don't realize is that most people who are in business want to have happy customers. And if you treat medicine like a business, you want to have happy customers too. And of course, you go to those Mexican doctors or whatever, you're going to have price transparency. Oh yeah,
Yes.
how much for a root? How much for a root canal? Oh, it's so many pesos. Thank you.
You can get that here in some of these independent clinics now where doctors don't
Yeah.
take insurance. Every time they're going to give you anything, they tell you the cost. And
Oh yeah.
it's extremely, it's a powerful thing to be a patient in charge of your health with a thinking doctor.
You know, it's funny too. I had a chiropractor who was outstanding, and at one point, I guess he did lose his license, and I said, "Well, I don't care," but he operated. But it was so interesting, and I looked around and said, "Is there another chiropractor like this?" And here are the facts. Number one, he was by himself, because once you start taking insurance or whatever, you're almost immediately hiring somebody else, uh, and so that's going to up the cost. And I think he took his credit cards and whatever, but that was it. It's when I lived in Columbus, there was also this one doctor who operated solely on cash, and actually had was really wild, as he had an ancient telephone in his office. I mean, it looked like it was out of the 1940s, and he actually answered the phone while he was talking to me, but because he was all by himself. But it's like, look, these are little minor inconveniences, but they'll definitely give you cheaper healthcare. Like a doctor operating all by himself, you probably never saw that, but yeah, you can be a doctor and operate all by yourself. It's because once you hire anybody, you've immediately got an extra expense.
Yeah. Right. No, the
Yeah.
system doesn't work. Our medical system is a joke. It's
Oh
scary.
yeah.
As somebody who's had an illness, it didn't work. I mean, so many times it didn't work for me. It almost killed me. And it's extremely, I say to everybody out there, get healthy, man. Get healthy. Do not let anything happen to you, because it is so much worse. I started getting ill in 2012. So then Obamacare was implemented around 2015, 2016. It was fully implemented. And slowly over time, my experience has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And today, when I have something wrong, I hesitate to go to the ER. Like I'm like, unless I'm dying, I don't want to go to the ER, because they scare the shit out of me. Everything is so it's wrecked. It's so wrecked. Nobody that works there. And if you think about COVID too, I think that was a nail in the coffin, because I think a lot of good people quit rather than become complicit in what they were doing. And I think a lot of people, the ones who refused vaccination were fired. And you had a lot of people who they were understaffed, overstressed, like all kinds of weird crap happened in hospitals. And now they're just so dysfunctional where when you interact with nurses, they don't even feel like nurses anymore. They feel like, cold bookkeepers. And they got their little computer in front of them, and that's all they kind of do. They're just sort of like data entry clerks and drug dispensers. Like they're not really caregivers. Doctors are checklist checkers. They will be replaced by Chat GPT. And thank God, I look forward to the day that there is an AI that can integrate better than the average doctor, because they suck. They're no good anymore. They got the wrong method. And just to put it back to, obviously that's like a travesty, but the philosophic problem with elevating somebody like Amesh, with not just his, first of all, you have to look that what sort of a system is he a part of, but also the things he's saying, mandatory vaccination of little kids. He's also called for more money to go to more what he calls infrastructure for tracking, in other words, social credit, like where our medical status is tracked by the CDC and the federal government, and we are given rewards, and like everything we're doing medically is being tracked and rated and ranked by a federal government. He is in favor of that for the greater good, for public health. It's almost like he's terrified of germs or something. Like he thinks we all need to be sort of clean and vaccinated and separated before he's comfortable. I don't know what's going on with him, but he's a statist. And he says it all the time, I just can't get over that objectivists have managed to pass him off as a reasonable expert about medicine.
I don't know if I could ever get to Peikoff, but if I could ever get to Leonard Peikoff, I would just like to say to him, Leonard, please take all of Ayn Rand's copyrights and just release them to the public domain.
Please.
And as much as people, there's a lot of criticism. That is one thing I can say about the Mises Institute. All of Murray Rothbard's stuff is out there. People still buy it, but
I've come to that conclusion too. And they use the excuse of, it's perfectly okay to be selfish and to want to make money off of Ayn Rand. We own these things. It's our property.
Well,
but if you want to spread the ideas of Ayn Rand, that is what you will have to do. You have to get it out of the hands of this elite, chosen few people who are running objectivism like a cult. They don't brook any disagreement, and they oust and excommunicate people who they disagree with politically and personally. It's a joke.
And I think the entire concept of inherited copyright is absurd.
I don't know enough about that,
I
but
mean, yeah, Ayn
I
Rand
want
does
to
not.
see
My
T-shirts.
point is,
I want to see a random person
Ayn
doing
Rand is not getting
YouTube
royalties.
videos with her
I'm saying
stories. You know,
Ayn Rand is not getting royalties because she's dead. So why should anybody else be able to get royalties for having done absolutely nothing? That's kind of the way I see it.
well, I believe in heirs, you
Yeah,
know, and property passing down. So I don't, you know, it's an incentive to work for people to pass things on and have a legacy. Um, but at this point, given who she is and what we're trying to achieve
yeah,
here, I absolutely think that they should do that.
and
But you don't see
certainly,
them doing anything else to spread Ayn Rand.
yeah, you know,
They're doing nothing. They don't
yeah,
even write anymore.
yeah,
They're frauds. When's the last time? I mean, Onkar Ghate puts out he's the chief philosophy officer, which alone is
yes,
like a creepy title. He puts out like an article every 6 months, and he's dead. He's weird and wrong and rationalistic in those articles. And otherwise, he doesn't write them because he doesn't want to be criticized. Yaron
yeah,
doesn't write down his ideas. He has a podcast where he spews his nonsense. And anyone out there who doubts me, don't listen to me. Just go listen to Yaron Brooks' podcast every day for every day he puts it out, whatever his schedule is, for 2 weeks. And step back and disconnect yourself from the personality that you might know that you like as a person, because he might have been charming at one time to you at a conference. Um, Disconnect yourself and listen to what he's actually saying. It is a constant stream of pro-leftist, anti-American bullshit. And often he contradicts himself in the same 10 minutes. So just like literally step back and think about the words he's saying and what that might mean seriously. Like when he has bashed people from Texas, that American cowboy type of person is somebody he hates. This, he doesn't like Americans, doesn't like what we culturally have stood for. He has this like, oh, this ideal utopian sort of thinking about the American ideal, but the reality of it and the people, the actual American people, he doesn't particularly like them. He thinks immigrants are better people than Americans. I don't really care. I mean, America is America. We're the citizens of America, get out if you don't like it. Um, he said he would never live in Texas because he wouldn't want to live with Texans. I like a lot of stuff that comes out of his mouth is just kind of icky. And the direct and obvious contradictions that he's constantly making, the silver-tongued like, oh, I'm not, I criticize the left too, but he'll do like one criticism mildly made for the 20 criticisms he makes of the right. And then so that he can say, oh, I criticize the left. I just saw a post, not by him, but by somebody else affiliated and in a position of authority, who said he said he was criticizing both sides. So he had something to say about the right and something to say about the left. But when he criticized the right, he called them nutty. And he was very, very deep in his criticism. His criticism of the left was really mild and more like appreciative of who they are as people. And today, when we're seeing such unbelievable totalitarian control from the left, the only defenders of freedom are on the right or the center sort of left right, the people who
yeah,
have embraced the right and are criticizing the people who are the danger to us are the far left. Those are the people. They've captured most of this country.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I
those
do
are the
think
people that they have all kinds of deference for
yeah,
while they're criticizing anybody on the right. And they take the extreme examples to
yeah,
try to paint everybody. And it's so disingenuous. All you have to do is listen for a couple of weeks impartially. Try to make your brain impartial. And you'll see what I'm talking about.
yeah. There are a lot more people on the left who oppose this than a lot of people think. The Kim Iversons, the Glenn Greenwald's, the RFK,
100%. Some of my
RFK2. Yeah.
Some of my favorite people
They've,
are on
they've,
the
been-
left.
they've, yeah,
James
they've actually
Lindsay,
been,
Glenn Greenwald. They've been great.
they've actually
Even
been
Elon
some of the
Musk,
most silenced people too, really. It's
Russell Brand, all of these incredible people from the left who really, truly, sincerely believe in freedom of speech and civil
yeah.
rights are 100% opposed to this, but Euron Brook isn't.
Yeah, well, yeah, and yeah, well, and I don't know, I don't know whether is Yaron's an American citizen, right? Or because
Yes.
I believe he served in the military of another country, though. But
Israel.
yes, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what his status is. I'm not going to comment on that.
It doesn't surprise me that the lack of Americans working at the Ayn Rand Institute is maybe part of the problem. There are a lot of immigrants there. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who are immigrants and I don't have a problem with them, but if you take a pool of immigrants who don't understand American culture, like, for example, Euron Brook is against the Second Amendment. I really don't know many Americans who are against the Second Amendment. It's mostly outsiders.
Yeah.
They don't understand gun culture, as they call it. They don't understand self-responsibility as deeply as we have it in our bones.
Well, a lot of the original circle, of course, was Canadians.
Yes,
Barbara and
Canadians.
Nathaniel Brandon, and
Look at what's happening in Canada.
some of their family
Bunch of
too.
statists.
But that doesn't mean we can't get good people. I mean,
Absolutely not. I mean, Leonard Peikoff's Canadian.
Well,
but
I don't know if
Ankara
you
is
saw
Canadian.
I don't know if you saw that picture. I shared that picture of people graduating from the John Galt School and the Ayn Rand Center, Armenia, and part of the reason was I showed it. I said, there are 8 males and 16 females in this photo. What are they doing in Armenia? And I said, thank you, and which is something you would not see in an American objectivism. It's about, I would say at least it's 2/3 male right now.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I've heard back in the days of NBI that it was pretty evenly split.
I haven't heard.
But you and I weren't there, so we don't know. That's, yeah.
I remember going to conferences where I was one of 10 females. But it's gotten a lot better.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't been in the last few years. I don't go to OCON anymore, but
yeah. I don't know if you're going to TOS Con or anything like that. Or
I would like to. I do support Craig Biddle. I support the Objective Standard and what they're doing there. I think they have a much more open, they want to discuss and debate ideas. They're not slurring people all the time to shut them down. They're not trying to run a cult. They're trying to spread Ayn Rand. That to me is the noble way to go about things.
Yeah.
Be wrong is fine. I don't, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
A lot. So it's fine to make mistakes. But when you start insulting people and your whole shtick is to excommunicate and you're acting like a cult, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. And Ayn Rand would be disgusted.
I think Ayn Rand would be somewhat disgusted too. She could get disgusted very easily. Some people. What was the whole reason for the? I wonder why there was a split there. That was kind of interesting. I know. I've actually been most involved with the Atlas Society over the years. I was in the 90s. And certainly, I was talking earlier, Jimmy Wales used to go to those conferences actually before he was famous.
What happened is personalities got involved. I think everybody in that situation kind of acted badly.
Yeah.
But for sure, you have this disagreement. And then one side is just trying to be open and honest about their disagreement and what they think. The other side is trying to unperson, excommunicate, behind the scenes, all kinds of bullshit. Say you're not allowed to discuss this. If you discuss this, then you aren't a real objectivist, or you're Like they start not just threatening Craig and behind the scenes trying to destroy his business, which was this incredible, you could walk into a Barnes and Noble and see the Objective Standard on the shelves promoting Ayn Rand and her ideas, and they tried to destroy that.
Yeah.
So why would they do that? You know, they don't like Craig. Is that really a good reason?
Yeah.
It's freaking vicious.
Yeah.
And they treated him viciously. They destroyed they nearly put his publication out of business they told anybody involved in objectivism, do not write for him. If you write for him, you're not going to be invited to speak at OCON.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
They literally made those threats. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And they, behind the scenes, made phone calls campaigning to get people to stop donating to or subscribing to the Objective Standard. So they tried to wreck his publication because they didn't like his opinion about what happened with John McCaskey, which a lot of people were upset about what happened with John McCaskey.
Yeah.
He was just the most vocal about it. And for years, then they marginalized him and so on. So that's the kind of tactics of a cult. That is not the tactics of an honest organization. It's not worthy of Ayn Rand. And unfortunately, they own all the stuff.
Yeah. That's it's definitely, I'm curious to know how much longer this is going to go. Interesting, Left. If you were going to introduce anybody to Ayn Rand, what would you give them? I always give them her article about Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that's a great art. I'm not going to give them some big fat book. It's short and easy to read. And I think it really shows a good attitude, and it's something. And people like Marilyn Monroe, so I think they'll get a positive vibe.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And you can get that available online too. That's another thing.
I like that idea. It depends on the person for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some people love to read fiction.
Yeah.
Men tend to like The Fountainhead better than Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
Women tend to like Atlas Shrugged. We the Living, blew my mind when I was young. It really touched me.
Yeah.
I've given Man's Rights as a pamphlet to a person particularly interested in politics, maybe. I've given The Virtue of Selfishness. I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was a close friend of mine, and she got to the point where she was rejecting that religion, and she was starting to drift into hedonism, because those are the alternatives, right?
Yeah.
So I gave her Philosophy Who Needs It and The Virtue of Selfishness. I was just trying to help give her a foundation, a secular foundation that she could live her life by that wasn't religious.
Yeah.
So it depends, but I love that idea of giving something more current issue, kind of more like shows her the way she's such a good thinker about reality. And as a lesson to people, like Ayn Rand looked at reality, looked at what was going on, and extrapolated from that. She didn't start at principles.
Yeah.
Principles are great, and they guide you and they help you, and they're a framework. But if you're looking out at reality and your ideas are wrecking things, something's wrong.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I have a show with a lady named Ali Bautista. She talked exactly about leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. I think that was my 9th show, but you might want to hear that. But, I think Ayn Rand was just trying to make sense of the things that she saw happen.
Yeah. But she came out like there was the whole Ground Zero mosque thing.
Yeah.
And I think Craig Biddle was wrong in this case. He said it's property rights. They have a right to build a mosque on Ground Zero. And Leonard Peikoff said, no, there's no right to suicide. You don't have to commit suicide. And that would be a moral suicide. You don't want to demoralize your population like that. It's not okay. And everyone has a right to say no. So that was a violation of property rights for the right to your life, like where you're going deeper into the ethics of it.
I think the movement, having been involved with the movement in the 90s, the tone of the movement definitely changed after the World Trade Center.
Yeah. Well, everything did. This whole country.
ARI didn't really surprise me after ARI didn't really disappoint me in 2020. I'm not surprised. They completely got COVID wrong. I'm sad to say that, but
I'm not either. I had already disconnected from them before COVID due to, it started for me, not because of their political stances, but because of their silencing way of expressing those. When I would disagree with them politically, I had to put up with them calling me names instead of actually discussing the ideas. I don't mean directly. I mean that they're not me personally. I mean that they would put out these statements. If you don't agree with our political position, by the way, this isn't a Rand position. This is our interpretation of objectivism applied to current issue. If you don't agree with that, you're evil. They would use these words. You're evil, you're racist, you're xenophobic, they'd pull whatever out of the hat to try to discredit you before you even spoke. So it wasn't like me personally. These were them just putting out statements. This was the way they talked. And I was really put off by that. When Peikoff retired, their politics and my politics went like this. I really tended to agree with Peikoff. So I thought everybody thought well, because they also agreed with Peikoff. Well, once he left the scene, you see who can't think and who can, because the people who couldn't started coming up with the craziest freaking ideas.
Yep.
And I couldn't get on board with it. And as a result, I was the bad guy. And I just don't believe in this lack of debate and discussion. If you're going to be rational and you're going to be honest intellectually, you have to be able to talk to people about ideas and hear their critique of your own thinking. If you can't do that, if you're so insular and insecure like that, that's a cult. A cult is not open to debate. You have the leaders, what they say goes, everybody else is unpersoned and evil. How is this not Scientology? And that's not objectivism. So it was their whole, it was an approach that I objected to first, not their ideas. And then with Trump, I didn't like Trump. In 2015, I didn't even vote. I was so upset. But I came to appreciate him in the first years of his presidency, and then his COVID response was wrong, upwards and downwards and across. And I hated it. That year it was hard. But my point is, he's a politician. They got TDS as bad as Sam Harris. They went crazy with the TDS, where I heard Robert Mayhew say, yes, Trump took us out of the Paris Climate Accords, which would be a good thing if it wasn't Trump. But because it's Trump and Trump doesn't know why he's doing it, and he's so anti-intellectual, or his motivation is wrong, it's not a good thing. And I'm like, what? What? That is not how you analyze a political action and a political policy, by the psychology or what's going on inside someone's head that you can't read. That is insane. That's primacy of consciousness. That's not primacy of existence.
Trump derangement syndrome is certainly real, but it's also, one part of the problem, one thing else too I've noticed is you were talking, about objectivists and gun owners, but there's always been somewhat of a hostility there towards certain groups of people. I mean, there's they would say, you're throwing your life away if you want to be an auto mechanic, or if you want to be a truck driver. And it's like, those are still elitist bullshit. Those are still things that have to be done.
Well, and they're perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
It is so snotty. It is so snotty. And exactly, it's those snotty people who couldn't like Trump. They found him to be inappropriate and gauche. But Obama, he's so well dressed and he smiles nice and he speaks well, and he doesn't have a truck driver attitude. Therefore, he's great. But Trump is just beyond the pale. And meanwhile, Obama is an evil communist. So they have it all wrong, and a lot of it is their own psychology. But they banded together, and they're insular, and they don't let anybody else discuss ideas with them. They don't let anybody disagree with them. They call them names. They silence objectivists. They make everybody intimidated. And as a result, there's nobody pushing back on them. There's no Peikoff, and they went off the rails.
Yeah. And
it wasn't until Peikoff came out with his video saying, I heard somebody said, if you support Trump, you're not a real objectivist. Well, I supported Trump. Make what you will of that. It wasn't until that moment that Euron backed off his crazy anti-Trump behavior.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, there were definitely issues with Trump, but the Trump derangement syndrome has certainly been very odd. It's
and then COVID on top of all of that. So that was I was done, way back in the mid-10s.
I'm coming to hate the left even more though, just because I'm seeing how savage they are. And I wonder, has ARI said anything about, like things like going on with the Dutch farmers and stuff like that, because that's another.
I doubt it. I don't pay much attention to them anymore.
That's becoming a big deal, and just the war on.
They don't criticize the left if they can help it ever. So
it's and the one thing, and to their credit, I got involved. I remember getting involved, going to the back then it was called the Institute for Objectivist Studies. The Atlas Society's summer seminar in '95, and I remember going there and thinking, "Wow, about half these people are on email. I need to get on email." And that was when I got on email. And I've now noticed, and at least objectivists seem to be way ahead of the curve in adopting, the new technology. And yet, the only organization in the objectivist movement that has reached out to Bitcoiners at all is the Atlas Society. The Atlas Society's had Michael Saylor speak, and I've noticed there's almost no interest in Bitcoin among objectivists.
That is I noticed it amongst my friends. So I think that among the rank and file, there's interest. Okay. I don't know. It's not very philosophic. It's a tool. Yeah. So, but Richard Salzman wrote about the gold standard. People have written about money and currency and the economy and stuff. So I don't know why no one, I don't know if they've talked about it or why, but I have friends who talk about it.
Oh, that's good.
Who are into it, and friends who talk about it and hate it. So, and there's in my circle, there's a lively debate about it.
I'm glad to hear that. Bitcoiners are, I don't, there's, every time I go to a Bitcoin meetup, though, I see an Ayn Rand book somewhere. Which I find interesting, but which doesn't surprise me. But I think there's also this realization among some Bitcoiners and it's definitely growing up among some of the more Mises Caucus type libertarians that democracy is the enemy of liberty and democracy is the enemy of capitalism. And they're not wrong about that. I don't know how that would work I don't know how that would work if you had a truly enlightened society that maybe democracy, but there's this realization that we've got to create something that they can't mess up.
Well, I think we're just too centralized, and we weren't supposed to be. That's not how it was supposed to be. And it's just gotten out of control. And, if you had 50 states running their own sovereign governments, you would see a wide variety of freedom versus control. And that would be okay. I think there's even among objectivists, there's a desire to control everybody according to freedom. Yeah. Not everybody wants freedom. So if you don't give people the ability to do what they want to do, you end up with conflicts, civil war the way we have it now. I think there's a limit to this, but it's not up to the federal government to go into every state and protect everybody against every violation of civil rights. That is not the intended purpose of the federal government. Especially, I think we especially went the wrong way talking about money at the turn of the last century with the Fed and the centralized banking. Obviously, that has been a great means of control over everybody. there were many steps along the way, but here we are. I mean, we started out with a pretty good government. The question is, why didn't it last? Is it the people, or is it something flawed in the way it was set up? But it was the greatest country and the freest people ever for a time in the history of man. That's an exciting accomplishment, and we can certainly get back there. We need a revival of these ideas. And one of those ideas, objectivists could learn from the idea of sovereignty, that a country has a border, a state has a border, states have a right to be against abortion. I mean, there are certain gray areas that should be states' rights. This freak out from Ayn Rand Institute about the Supreme Court. All they did was say, this is not our jurisdiction. And that was legally correct. So, maybe I don't like it, but I don't get to tell everybody how to live.
There are things that do belong at the state level. I've actually become pro-abortion because of COVID, believe it or not. I see how savage I see how savage the left is now. And, if Gretchen Whitmer or Kamala Harris or Jacinda Ardern wants to have an abortion, I do not want to get in their way. I say, go ahead, have it.
Yeah.
It's a war, and if one side's going to kill their kids, it's
that side also has the younger generation environmentally brainwashed that they don't want to have children.
But it's so crazy right now. I don't know what, and this is something, some of the more conservative people, this is what they didn't like about Ayn Rand, is they felt like Ayn Rand had this attitude that family was irrelevant, which does kind of bother me. It's a shame. I remember that
She didn't have family. I mean,
she didn't have family, and a lot of the people in Ayn Rand's circle didn't have kids either. It's
hard to appreciate it before you have it. I think if you don't have children, and I mean, I sound like a dork, but before I had my daughter, I didn't appreciate it. I really couldn't understand the intensity of feeling and the wave of kind of fulfillment that you get from children and family, and then being sick, which a lot of people haven't gone through, but I've gone through. You realize how family is there, but friends, a lot of friends can't deal with that, or they're not equipped. I mean, family just kind of has to put up with you. And so
and family does think, I do wonder sometimes, what are you going to do if you're incapacitated and you
and people get old and you get weaker
for you, or something like that.
Newsflash, you are going to get older and weaker.
Your kids,
and you're going to be grateful for the family.
Your kids will know what to do for you, and watching, and you're watching your mom right now. It's get old. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever experience in life.
It's really hard.
And what makes it hard is because you know how it ends. If you have to struggle with a baby learning to read and a baby learning to walk, you at least know the baby's going to learn all this stuff, and your baby's going to get smarter, and your baby's going to learn how to do all these things. But when you're watching it happen with an old, because they do kind of turn back into kids, it's very hard to watch it happen. But you just realize you're there for them. But you're with your mom. It's I watched my parents. It wasn't easy, and
it's very difficult.
Your daughter's almost sort of. But who I think is, I thought The Hunger Games were a great series of novels, and portray and read the novels. They're better than the movie. But I thought here's somebody who's very much like a Randian heroine, but it's also a very pro-family book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think largely what motivates Katniss Everdeen throughout that novel is her love for
family,
her love for her dad, and her dad who got killed,
her sister.
There's the scene where she goes back and she says, one thing I wanted to make sure I get was my father's hunting jacket, You know, and it's funny how it's funny how I still have this old worn out jacket.
Well, she volunteers to protect her sister.
Yeah, she volunteers to protect her sister. You know, it's funny how I still have this old worn out, beat up jacket myself, and people look at me and say, "Why you wear that?" I just say it was my dad's. You know, it's like, and they shut up. You know,
yeah, they mean a lot.
You know, it's
it makes me realize how much I mean to my daughter too, and how important I am, and everything I do is to her.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, it was nice talking, but speaking of my daughter, I gotta go. So.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, thanks for having me on. I don't have anything to plug because I no longer have a podcast. Yes. I'm working now I'm going to be making deprogramming videos for kids. So that's what I'm working on developing scripts for right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
You should talk to Carlin Borisenko. Do you know who that is?
No.
She does a lot of work with school kids and woke stuff and what school boards are doing. Yeah.
Really?
Also,
maybe send me her link or something.
Yeah, I will let you know. And and also, I'm Chris Baker. Please like, subscribe, and follow the channel. And I have a novel called
You can follow me on Twitter at Sunny Lohmann.
Yeah, I have a novel called Escape from the Village, and we are out. Yeah.